play the King's Gambit opening. We start the game with the moves pawn to e4 and pawn to e5, and then white plays pawn to f4. At first glance, this move might look very risky because white is opening up the kingside, making it vulnerable to some dangerous checks. However, there is a strong reason behind this strategy. From this point, there are two main possibilities. If black captures the pawn on f4, the game enters the King's Gambit accepted variation. If black does not capture the pawn, it becomes the King's Gambit declined variation. In this video, we will focus on the King's Gambit accepted, and I will guide you through the most popular variations, strategies for white, and how black can counter this aggressive opening. Once black captures the pawn on f4, the immediate threat for white is queen to h4 check, so white must play very carefully. A couple of good responses include developing the bishop with bishop to e2 or bishop to c4, which also clears the f1 square, allowing the king to move if necessary. In fact, bishop to c4 was famously used by the legendary Bobby Fischer to win many games in this variation. This line is known as the bishop's gambit. However, the move I believe to be the strongest, and also the most popular, is knight to f3. Now let's take a moment to understand the main idea behind this opening. Black is a pawn up, and with accurate play, black usually maintains a slight advantage throughout the game. From white's perspective, the main goal is to dominate the center and focus on rapid piece development. Notice how white has forced black's pawn away from the center, and now white can easily push pawn to d4 to gain control of the center and also attempt to recover the sacrificed pawn. Moves like bishop to c4, knight to a5, and castling kingside will all work together to launch a systematic attack against black's kingside. This is actually a very complex opening that requires deep study and careful analysis, which is why it is not played very often at the top levels. I usually recommend playing the King's Gambit against an opponent who is rated slightly higher than you. Such a player would likely be well prepared with standard opening theory and could easily outplay you if you stick to normal lines. Therefore, trying something different might give you an advantage. The King's Gambit can become your surprise weapon, especially if you have prepared well and understand the key ideas and strategies behind it. You can use it to complicate the game and create unusual, unexpected positions on the board, potentially throwing your opponent off guard. Alright, now let us look at the two most popular variations in the King's Gambit accepted line. In the first variation, we will see how white can achieve a strong position, and in the second variation, I will show you how black can defend solidly and maintain an advantage. The moves I am going to show you are some of the best and most popular choices made by top players on both sides. At the end, I will summarize all the important strategies and ideas for both white and black, so make sure you watch till the end. Now, from this position, the most common move played by black is pawn to g5, defending the extra pawn. This is considered the main line. In response, white plays pawn to h4, attacking the g5 pawn. Black continues with pawn to g4, attacking white's knight. White plays knight to e5, saving the knight and centralizing it. Now, if black tries to play pawn to d6, then white can simply capture the pawn on d6 and equalize the material. Therefore, the best move for black here is knight to f6, which attacks the central pawn on e4. If you want to regain your sacrifice pawn immediately, you can simply capture on g4. If black recaptures with the knight, then you capture back with your queen. And if black instead captures on e4, then white plays pawn to d3. The knight will have to move, and then white can capture the pawn on f4. Going back, the stronger move for white in this position is to play bishop to c4, directly targeting the sensitive f7 square. Black is then forced to block with pawn to d5. White captures with pawn, takes on d5, and then black plays bishop to d6, which stops white from advancing the d-pawn and at the same time attacks the knight on e5. White now plays pawn to d4, defending the knight on e5 and attacking the f4 pawn. Black castles kingside, and white captures the pawn on f4. If you look at the board now, we have a really exciting game. White is a pawn up, and all of white's pieces are getting closer to the black king, creating serious attacking chances. Once white pushes pawn to g3, the black pawn on g4 will soon fall. After white castles kingside, even the rook from f1 can join the attack. Overall, this should lead to a very promising game for white. Now, these are just a few of the common lines, but there are many different variations possible. So, let me quickly summarize the key points you need to focus on as white. First of all, it is important to develop your pieces rapidly, especially the three minor pieces, the knight and the two bishop. Eventually, you should push pawn to d4 to claim control over the center. You should be able to recover your sacrifice pawn through these methods, so material equality should not be a major concern. Keep an eye on the open e-file, as it can be used by your queen to deliver checks and discovered attacks against the black king. Ultimately, you should aim to open up black's king side as early as possible, and if possible, prevent black from castling. The f7 square will always be a sensitive target, so always look for opportunities to expose black's king through attacks on that point. In order to break through, you might have to sacrifice some material occasionally, so do not be afraid to do that. Remember, in the king's gambit, it is not just about material. You must also give importance to the dynamic positioning of your pieces. Alright, now let us look at how black can counter this opening. But before we move on, I would really appreciate your support, so please take a moment and hit that thumbs up button right now. Okay, so a very effective way for black to handle the king's gambit is by using Fischer's defense, which begins with the move pawn to d6. This is considered one of the best defensive setups for black. By playing pawn to d6, black not only opens the diagonal for the bishop, but also solidifies the center and prevents white from advancing with pawn to e5. After this, you will usually see two main responses from white, pawn to d4 or bishop to c4. Let us first look at pawn to d4. After this, black plays pawn to g5, defending the f4 pawn. Then white responds with pawn to h4, attacking the defender. Black pushes again with pawn to g4, attacking the knight. This time, white cannot play knight to a5 because the pawn on d6 covers that square. Moving to g5 is also not possible, as after pawn to f6 or pawn to h6, the knight would be trapped. Therefore, the best move for white is to retreat with knight to g1. Now, queen to f6 is the best move I recommend for black. It defends the f4 pawn and applies pressure to the center. White continues with knight to c3, planning knight to d5, but black prevents it with knight to a7. Then, knight g1 to e2, increasing pressure on f4. Black responds with bishop to h6, defending it. White plays queen to d2, adding another attacker. Black continues with bishop to d7. Now, white plays pawn to g3 to attack the f4 pawn. Pushing forward is not ideal here, as it would allow white's knight to occupy a strong square on f4. Therefore, black plays knight to c6, attacking the d4 pawn and keeping the knight tied to its defense. After pawn takes on f4, black calmly castles queenside. If you look at the position now, the material is even, but black's king is safe, while white's king is still stuck in the center. Black also has strong attacking chances on the king side, so this should lead to a good game for you. Now going back, let us see what happens if after pawn to d6, white plays bishop to c4. Black responds with pawn to h6, preparing pawn to g5. Then comes pawn to d4, attacking the f4 pawn, and black plays pawn to g5 to defend. White castles kingside. Black develops with bishop to g7, increasing pressure on the center. White plays pawn to c3, and black responds with knight to c6. Then white tries pawn to g3, aiming to open the f-file. From here, black plays the strong move bishop to h3. If white moves the rook, black can break through on the king side, bringing the queen into play, creating huge problems for white. In fact, white's best option here is to go for an exchange sacrifice. After all this, black is ahead in material, the king is much safer, and there are lots of attacking chances. According to the database, black wins over 45% of games from this position, while white wins only about 30%. To quickly summarize, as black, remember a few key points. Hold on to the f4 pawn smartly. Avoid unnecessary pawn moves to maintain a solid pawn structure. Develop all your kingside pieces quickly and control the center. Castle queenside as soon as you can, and then launch your attack against the white king.